Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, the managing editor at CinemaBlend and co-host of the ReelBlend podcast, here to introduce another bonus episode of the show, this time on behalf of the new film Chevalier that is coming out to theaters. Now, we've been talking about this film since it had its debut at Toronto last year, started building some early buzz, primarily because of the lead performance by Kelvin Harrison Jr., who's outstanding as this essentially virtuoso composer and violin player who is making a noise at a time in France's history where there's a ton of stuff going on politically, and how he's able to sort of cut through the dramatics of that with using his musical skillmanship to get through and touch the different audiences that are out there waiting to see the next big thing coming up. We spoke to, on behalf of Chevalier, writer-director Stephen Williams and Stefani Robinson, who are a terrific team that have a lot of great stories about the making of this film and bringing it through the film festival circuit. I know you guys are going to be really excited to see this film when it comes to theaters. So we wanted really to get these guys on the show and talk about their process and talking about how difficult it can be when you have a film that's driven primarily by music and not as much dialogue, and how music can almost fill the space of dialogue in a film like this, but also just getting a period piece that appeals to a modern audience, but still says some really important things about what's going on in the historical era where it takes place. So without further ado, with Chevalier coming to theaters, we wanted to do this bonus episode with Stephen Williams and Stefani Robinson on behalf of the new film Chevalier. Good. I know it's been a long day. We'll try to hit you guys with some things you haven't heard yet.
Awesome. We're excited.
Stephanie, I want to start with you because the performances, and there are several performances throughout the course of the movie, and they are dialogue free, largely, but they have to say a lot. They have to convey a lot of emotion. And I'm just curious, inside of your screenplay, how much of it you spelled out versus, because you could write like they play the violin and then it's just left alone. How much did you sort of color in the narrative?
Oh man, that is a really good question, and not one we have heard today. So
I win.
You're doing it.
I gotta up my questions now.
We went through so many drafts of the script. I have written and rewritten this movie more times than I've ever done. And I think that in each draft, I think what Stephen and I really wanted to preserve was just like a level of interiority for the characters to actually have an opportunity to bring that X factor, right? Like to elevate the performance in a way that they didn't need to be spoon-fed what was happening. And I think we're both believers that actors are great collaborators, and they're going to bring to the words and to the camera much more than I think we ever anticipate that they're going to do. So, and Stephen, you had said this before, and I think it's so true, and just like the way that I try to write, which is, like you said at one point, I want to make a silent film, meaning that, if you were to just hit mute on the film, that the story would be so clearly conveyed, and you didn't have to actually literally spell out every single part, whether that was through dialogue or through blocking specifically written into the script. So I think, to answer your question, it was a little bit of a game that I played between both. There were some scenes where it absolutely made sense to be as prescriptive as possible and as detailed as possible, and there were other times where it's like, I think this needs to breathe, and I'm happy to leave this scene as scant as possible. And that to me also feels much more powerful and leaves space for the actor to actually color in the blanks for themselves.
Oh, that's awesome.
Stephen, I want to talk about how you determine whether or not an actor needs to do the thing that their character actually does. When an actor plays a basketball player, you kind of need them to be able to play basketball, but if an actor plays a pilot, they don't need to know how to land a plane. So when it comes to Kelvin, who is phenomenal, and it looks like it looks legit, how do you determine whether or not, like, look, dude, you need to practice, or like, it's cool, we can fudge it?
I mean, look, for the record, Joseph Kosinski may take issue with your question because he seems knows how to fly.
That's very true.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Are we going to use Tom Cruise as the bar?
I'm not saying I'm Kosinski, but
No, that attitude, Stephen.
Chevalier Maverick. I'm ready for it.
wow, I like it. I like it. The sequel. It was really important to me that, I mean, it's a key question you've asked. It was really important to me that Kelvin learn how to play the violin. I did not want to do, I personally feel like audiences are way too sophisticated today. And if I was to have used a stunt double or, rely on cinematic trickery, the audience would have sussed that out, from jump. And that was something I totally wanted to avoid. I wanted to do everything that I possibly could to immerse the viewer in Joseph's subjective experience as he traversed all the narrative beats of our story. Mm-hmm. And that meant, and I also, part of that meant that I wanted to limit the use of editing. I wanted to limit the number of cuts. I wanted to shoot in long takes, long unbroken takes, where it became clear that you were watching someone do the thing that the movie was alleging they were doing. And in so doing, you would be identifying more closely with that character and that character's journey than you would be if there was the distancing of montage. And so that was a really specific choice. But of course, it required that the actor was willing, B, capable of learning how to portray a virtuosic violinist. And fortunately, Steph and I chose exactly the right actor who, in addition to all the other requirements of the role, acting requirements of the role, was prepared to put in 6 months of 6-hour days learning how to portray this incredibly amazing and kinetic and energetic violinist in our history. And so what you see in the movie is all Kelvin Harrison Jr. It's not a single stunt double, not for violin, not for fencing. It's all Kelvin. And I hope it makes a difference. Otherwise, I just tortured him needlessly.
Well, no, that actually leads exactly into the question that I wanted to ask you, which is because I thought he was just magnetic. I could not take my eyes off of him. In every scene that he's in throughout the course of the movie. And I'm curious, when you are kind of like mid-shoot or even at the beginning of the shoot, and you realize you're getting an actor who's giving you something special, do you change your approach at all to maybe like re-storyboard stuff and think like, I got to show him more. I have to use more of what I'm getting here because this is really unique and this is a special performance. Did that happen here? Have you ever had to do that in the past?
That's a good question.
Not really. And I'll tell you why. First of all, Steph and I made the very clear decision from the beginning that Joseph, there's not a scene in the movie that Joseph isn't in.
Right.
He is our guide through this story. He is the person in whose footsteps we walk as we walk ourselves through this story. So that was by design. And in terms of your question about previous, have I ever had to do that before? No, because I kind of approach everything the same way, which is I have a very clear idea. By the time we hit the floor, I have a very clear idea about what the visual grammar is going to be and what the approach is going to be. And I feel like, yes, you want to maintain a certain kind of looseness for to take advantage of any sort of improvisational or improvisatory moments, happy accidents. Let's avoid the imp word and just say happy accidents.
Sure.
And you want to be loose enough to do that, but at the same time, I think that you want to have a very kind of specific point of view, and you want to commit to that, and you gamble all chips in on that way of telling the story. So, I mean, in terms of Kelvin's performance, we were just grateful every day that he was showing up with that level of commitment and focus.
Yeah, magnificent.
Guys, whenever you are telling a story that is based on a real person and based on real events, just by nature of having to squeeze it all into 2 hours, sometimes you got to fudge some real details. Sometimes you got to squeeze real events together. Sometimes you got to, go left when in actuality he went right. But how do you determine as storytellers whether or not a detail is in the ballpark of we can mess with this, it's okay, it's not important, versus no, this needs to be true to what actually happened?
Ooh, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule. Honestly, I think it's intuitive. I think it's just what feels good. I think that early on, like Stephen and I staked our claim in the script, and we made ourselves the authority of the story. And we treated it with respect. We treated it with dignity. We, endeavored to do so every single day. And I think that we did that. But I think the interesting thing about your question is that from the get-go, we never wanted this to be a cradle to grave story. I say all the time, I never wanted to write a Wikipedia page. Mm-hmm. So you can look at Wikipedia yourself. You can go listen to some amazing podcasts about Joseph. I write movies. I get paid to write movies. I like watching movies. Like I want, I love a cinematic story, and there's a conventionality to the story. And I don't say that in a negative way. I say that in a way that I think Stephen and I really wanted to embrace this story from an operatic perspective. Operatic not meaning spectacle for the sake of spectacle, but operatic in that conventionality that it's for the masses. It's for everyone. Like when you come in, and you watch this movie, you clearly see the hero, you clearly see the villain, you're pulled in by the romance, you're pulled in by the anger and the injustice. And that was the most important thing, on top of, again, trying to be as spiritually true as possible. When I say spiritually true, does that mean sometimes, exactly as you said, do we fudge some of what really happened? Do we condense it? Do we attribute actual fact to different characters, or maybe characters that, didn't actually exist in the framework of how they existed in real life? Sure. But we wanted this movie to just feel like a movie. And there's something sacred and special about movies and how we tell these stories. And that, to us, I think, was king, on top of, of honoring Joseph. And if something wasn't factually correct, it's like, do we feel like this is spiritually truthful?
Is there something kind of...
We weren't trying to make a documentary, and so, Steph has heard me say this a million times, so apologies to her for having to endure hearing it again. But this is just this great Tom Stoppard quote that, we came across early on that became, in many ways, our kind of gave us permission to approach the story in the way that we did. And that quote is, "Facts are facts, but truth is something else entirely and is a product of the imagination." And I subscribe to that notion. And I think, candidly, we all do. If you tell stories about your relatives or your childhood friends, you're not recalling those events without them being filtered through the prism of your own emotional and psychological perspective. And, if we interviewed all of the other people in your stories, they would be like, no, it wasn't. The bike was not blue, it was red, and but it doesn't matter to the truth of what you're telling. It may be factually inaccurate, but it's still true. So that's the place, the hyphen that we reside in.
Yes.
Whenever my dad catches a fish, he always remembers it being much bigger than it actually was. And I was like, come on, I was there, right?
What's truthful? He caught the fish, and there was dinner on the table that night.
Stefani, I was watching some of your interviews from Toronto, and you mentioned something that really struck me while I was watching it, which is that so many of the themes that are prevalent in the movie feel very contemporary. And, as I was watching certain things play out, I was thinking, this doesn't have to be a period piece. And then I think I actually heard you say specifically, like, this doesn't have to be a period piece. But as you were researching this man's history, what was the one that surprised you the most, that you were just like, I can't believe that is taking place during this time period because it's still so relevant today?
I think, you know what? Like, it was the registration of Black people coming into France. Like, it was just so, like, at the time that we were reading about this stuff, it was just so blatantly really paralleled with the illegal immigration conversation we were having in this country. Like a lot of the rhetoric was just nearly word for word exactly the same.
Wow.
They're going to come here, they're going to steal our jobs, we need to register them, we need to keep them under control. We're going to lose the purity of our nation if we, open up our borders to anyone who doesn't look like us. Our religious values are at stake, our French values are at stake. And it was like, wow, like, I mean, it's obviously an incredibly heavy, disturbing, multifaceted topic that we're not going to get into now, but just how similar it was just like, wow, like
that's really true. You're so right on about
so
that.
like, I mean, it was just the same thing with Code Noir and what they were doing in France, like just calling for the registration of immigrants coming into the country.
Yeah.
Mm.
The fact that you can take this screenplay and set it in so many different periods of history and so many different places around the world, I think says a lot. I do want to circle back to and follow up on, because I do love the idea, and that's the reason I do love this movie so much, is because you guys made a movie and you didn't do the Cradle to the Grave documentary, which I think is fantastic. We had a director on the podcast a few weeks ago for an action film, and he said that before he started making the action film, he put a line down a whiteboard and wrote, what do I love about action movies and what do I hate about action movies? And so I had him tell me what all the things he hated. I wanted to know, what are the things that you put on the right side of the board? So for you guys, what are the things about period pieces, these genre films, that honestly, just as movie fans, you can't stand? And as you guys started to put this film together, you went, no, we're not going to do that.
This is such a good question. Things I can't stand about period films. Oh my God. Like, a lot of the times it is the music and the pacing. Like that is something that has become synonymous with period films, and why I think some of them get a bad rap is because you sort of inherently think, oh, this is going to be slow or whatever. And this is sort of why I think we subconsciously and consciously tried to inject so much music and movement and pacing into what we were doing to try to give it that contemporary feel. So it didn't feel like it was so, far away, and that it was sort of like inaccessible.
That's the thing. That gesture that Steph just made.
Yes.
That's the masterpiece theater thing is distancing. You're watching it from a remove. And this is obviously a generalization. There are many period pieces that are that don't run afoul of that. But in terms of your question, the ones that do, from our point of view, are like, they're proscenium, they're at a distance. And I think that that's a fundamental flaw, because what it denies is that those people in that period, when they were living their lives, they weren't going, man, one day people are going to look back on us and say they're in a period, they're living in a period. It was their contemporary, they're now, they're present. And so we wanted viewers to feel like, oh, these events are unfolding in the now for the characters that are in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be
that umbrella, and too many horses. You gotta ask about cars back then. Too many horses.
At what point in the process, though, does Keira Knightley call you and ask you why she's not in it?
You know what? We'd be lucky to have her.
Lucky to have her.
Lucky to have her.
Lucky to be one of the Chanel No. 5 commercials with Keira Knightley.
Yeah, man.
I think Joe Wright should step aside.
Hey, I would watch your Pride and Prejudice. Believe me, I would like to see you tackle that. So Stephanie, I think people who know your credits probably expected something different coming into this. They might have expected you to lean a little more into comedy.
You think they maybe expected vampire dick jokes, right?
Possibly.
There's still time to slide one into this movie. You can do some pickups, and I'm just saying.
I'm curious, because Shadows obviously started as a movie, and then you guys figured out how to turn it into a TV series, and Atlanta is a TV series. Do you have any interest whatsoever in maybe doing a one-off Atlanta movie with that crew?
Oh, always. We talk about it all the time. When we need more money, we'll just write a movie.
The motivation.
Yeah. That offer is always on the table. Absolutely. I mean, and that would be the perfect show to do that with, I think. Like, I mean, we could probably make, 20 movies with those characters and have it feel new and fresh and insane each time, I think.
Guys, there's something that I love doing. I'm talking to you from Chicago, and there's something that I love doing every couple of months. The CSO, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, they have this series that they call At the Movies, which is you go, you sit down in the theater, they play a movie on the screen, and the symphony plays the music alongside the movie. And as I was watching this film, I thought, God, this would be a perfect movie to do something like that for, which sort of made me think, like, at what point do you guys start thinking about, because once this movie's out there, like, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's not yours, but like it belongs to everybody. People can do whatever it is that they want to with it. I'm sort of curious how that feels as an artist, sort of, the idea that like you could create something and people could do something cool with it, or like a moment becomes a meme, or like with that feeling of letting go of your baby and letting other people kind of mess with your own art.
Well, it's terrifying, but it's, in my experience, it's always completely rewarding. I mean, talking specifically about what we do in the shadows, like the amount of fan-generated art, clothing, fan fiction, like, I'm serious, like some of this stuff, I'm like, you guys got to write on this show. Like, you guys, hire you. But it's really like, oh man, like, I mean, it's obviously always daunting. And we were talking about earlier, it's like when you do sort of release anything to the world, or as you're crafting something that is hopefully going to be shared with people, I think there's a little voice in your head that's like, man, I hope this resonates with someone. And there's always the terror, at least for me, that it absolutely will not. I think any way that fans or the community can engage and sort of take it and continue the conversation, I say that it's job well done. I don't know, on Watchmen, did you feel like there was a lot of
terror? Yes.
But I mean, it was just like, oh my God, like I was so deep into Watchmen. I know so many people were, and obviously it's based on pre-existing material, but did you see like a lot of
yeah, I mean, but for me, I'm just kind of like, I mean, first of all, I'm not tapped into like social media at all.
You got to get on it. Have you heard of it? Social media?
I've heard of it, but
it's really only brought us together.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I'm trying to be a grown-up, and by that I mean, there are things that you can control, and the things that you can't control, you need to let go of. And so I'm trying to get to that place. I can't profess that I'm there, but I'm trying to get to that place.
Stephen, before we run out of time, because we are kind of into the nuts and bolts, we like to ask questions that we know our audience is super in tune to. And we're the types of geeks who, when we're watching certain scenes, we're staring into the background, we're paying attention to certain things.
Uh-oh.
Yes,
there are water bottles. Exactly.
No.
Exactly.
Starbucks cup. You have scenes with many extras in costume, and we all know that there are times on a movie set when it's just waiting. Talk to me about a day on Chevalier while you're working of it, when you just knew the extras had to be standing around in costume waiting, and what the challenge of that is to be able to like know when it's time to go, because it takes so much time to build up to the moment when you're ready to shoot.
That's a very multifaceted question for the following reasons. First of all, we shot in Prague during COVID. The processing of all the background people through COVID testing and meeting every COVID protocol already added an hour and a half, 2 hours to the day. Then no names, but the director of this piece insisted on shooting, as I mentioned before, in very complicated, long takes that required, in most cases, hours of rehearsal, wherein there was no shooting happening, much to the consternation of beam counters and studio types. And so I feel like maybe the background was probably waiting for me more than I was waiting for the background.
The ego on this director, who will remain nameless.
It wasn't about ego, though. No, it wasn't about ego. It was just about, okay, well, this feels like the only way this story can be best told. So now we have to do it.
Well, we're very excited for people to get a chance to see it. We want to thank you guys for coming on the show. Hope we hit you with a few things you didn't get a chance to talk about yet.
So many. You guys did a great job. I'm very impressed.
Thank you so much.
Wait, I didn't get to ask what attracted you to the project.
You like our hearts stopping.
I know you had me. You had me. It's like, no, really.
We're out of time. We're out of time.
That was my next one. Guys, thank you so much.
Appreciate it, guys. Thank you. We want to thank Stephen and Stephanie, of course, for coming on ReelBlend and joining us. And I do want to put this film on your guys' radar. You know me, I'm not a huge fan of period films, but the way that they approach the material, and again, Kelvin's performance in the lead of this picture is truly outstanding. And it's one of those films that I think is going to seriously benefit from seeing on the big screen. And we say that all the time, but it's the Dolby sound for this one because so much of it is music driven. You'll see it takes the sort of what you would assume is sort of a stodgy period piece, but injects it with so much attitude and energy that I think it elevates it above the type of films that you see in this atmosphere. We'll give a full review in the main show on Friday. In addition, on the main show, we have director Dexter Fletcher, who's going to be coming on to talk about his new Apple TV Plus film Ghosted, which stars two up-and-comers you might have heard of before, Chris Evans and Ana de Armas. Of course, Dexter did Rocket Man, which we talked to him about, and a bunch of other stories from his filmmaking history. So you're going to want to hit the main show on Friday. We are available all the different places where podcast needs are met. We're on YouTube as well, too. So make sure you give us a like and a subscribe over there and keep it locked in for all things ReelBlend.